Lila had always been the epitome of kindness, so when she decided to stand up for an elderly gentleman who was being bullied by a group of teenagers, she never anticipated the consequences. Despite her courage, she lost the job she had dedicated herself to for years, but Lila remained resolute in her decision to do what was right. Just hours after her dismissal, the ground vibrated with the roar of 500 motorcycles as a group of bikers entered the town. Little did Lila know, this unexpected event would change her life forever. This is the story of that life-altering moment. Let's begin. Lila Jennings, a 42-year-old waitress, had worked at Millie's Diner, a beloved landmark in the town, for almost 2 decades. While many of her peers had transitioned to other professions, Lila chose to stay loyal to the diner, where she found true fulfillment in serving others. To Lila, the regular customers weren't just patrons, they were her extended family. Life had been full of challenges. As a single mother for over 10 years after her husband passed away, Lila had raised her daughter, Mia, on her own, often working double shifts at the diner to make ends meet. Even though people often suggested she find a more lucrative job, Lila firmly believed that money wasn't everything. Millie's Diner had been a constant source of support during her hardest times, and her loyalty to the place was unwavering. The diner had become the heart of the town, its iconic red and white structure a symbol of warmth and community on Main Street for more than 50 years. It had been a central part of daily life, with the majority of the town's population frequenting it regularly. Lila had joined the diner when Millie, the original owner, was still in charge. She had been treated like family, with Millie offering extra shifts when she was struggling to support Mia through college. The diner's special charm lay in Lila's warm and welcoming nature, which had endeared her to both the regulars and newcomers alike. Not only was Lila an exceptional waitress, but she also had a remarkable ability to make every customer feel valued. She knew that Mr. Bennett, who had been a loyal patron for 15 years, preferred his coffee with 2 sugars and his toast extra crispy. She remembered that Mrs. Adams, a retired teacher who had once taught Lila's daughter Mia, was allergic to nuts. After 2 decades of serving the community, Lila could recall the story behind each regular customer who walked through the diner's doors. Everything changed 3 months ago when old Mr. Miller retired and his son George took over. Unlike his father, who had always prioritized community, George was solely focused on maximizing profits. He immediately began implementing changes, hiking prices, altering the traditional menu, and striving for a more upscale dining experience. The regular customers, who had been coming for years, began to feel like outsiders, and Lila watched helplessly as the once welcoming and familiar atmosphere of the diner began to slip away. One rainy afternoon in October, Lila was working her usual shift when she noticed an elderly man pulling up on an old Harley-Davidson. She instantly recognized him as Carl Jenkins, a 75-year-old regular who had been visiting the diner every Tuesday for his favorite coffee and apple pie, even longer than Lila had worked there. His leather jacket was weathered, his beard had turned gray, but he always greeted everyone with a warm smile and kind words. Carl had been a staple at Millie's Diner since its opening. He wasn't just a customer to Lila. Carl was part of the diner's legacy. Behind his regular booth hung an old photograph from 1968 showing him and Mr. Miller in their youth, both proudly standing next to their motorcycles. In the early days of Lila's time at the diner, Carl had been one of the first to make her feel welcome, regaling her with stories of the town's past as she topped off his coffee cup. As Carl made his way to his usual spot, a group of teenagers from the nearby private school began making loud, mocking comments. They were exactly the type of customers George had been trying to attract. Flashy, with their parents' credit cards on display, treating the staff like mere servants. "Look at that old guy," one of them sneered. "Probably thinks he's still some tough biker." "Should have left the motorcycle at the retirement home," another laughed. "Bet he can't even remember where he parked it," a third added, causing the entire group to burst into cruel laughter. Lila saw Carl's shoulders droop slightly as he passed their table. She knew he could hear them. Everyone could. But he said nothing. He just kept walking with quiet dignity. Carl had lived through too much to be bothered by a group of disrespectful teens, yet Lila could see the pain in his eyes. The teenagers grew bolder, and one of them stuck out his foot as Carl walked by. Lila moved quickly, steadying Carl before he could trip. That was the moment she couldn't take it anymore. 20 years of watching the diner change and witnessing these kids disrespect someone like Carl finally pushed her over the edge. "That's enough," she said firmly, turning to face the teenagers. "Pack up your things and leave. We don't serve bullies here." The teens were stunned. No one had ever stood up to them before. "Do you know who my father is?" one demanded, pulling out his phone. "He's on the city council." "I don't care if your father is the president," Lila replied, her voice steady and firm. "You don't treat people like that in here, not at Millie's diner, not ever." The noise brought George rushing out of his office. When the teens told him what had happened, his face turned bright red with anger. "Lila, you can't throw out paying customers," he snapped. "Apologize to them immediately." But Lila stood her ground, just as she had in every challenging moment of her life. "No, sir," she said firmly. "They were trying to trip an elderly man. That's dangerous and cruel." Then, with a cold tone, George responded, "You're fired. Get your things and leave." Carl tried to intervene, but George wouldn't listen. Lila took off her apron, gave Carl a gentle smile, and walked out of the diner with her head held high, just as she had always taught her daughter Mia to do when facing injustice. What George didn't realize was that Carl Jenkins wasn't just any old biker. In the 1960s, he had founded the Iron Riders Motorcycle Club, which had since become the largest and most influential motorcycle club in the state. Over the years, they had built a reputation for their charitable efforts and community service, raising millions for local causes. In fact, they had secretly helped Lila years ago when she struggled to cover her late husband's medical bills, although she had never known it was them. As soon as Lila left the diner, Carl pulled out his phone. Within minutes, the story spread through every motorcycle club in the city. Other patrons in the diner also began texting and calling friends, sharing how George had fired Lila for standing up to bullies. 2 hours later, the ground began to rumble. The unmistakable sound of motorcycles filled the air as bikes rolled in, not just from the Iron Riders, but from every club in the state. Old bikes, new bikes, riders young and old, until the entire street was packed with over 500 motorcycles. Carl Jenkins led the group into the diner, now brimming with leather-clad bikers. George stood frozen behind the counter as Carl explained loudly what had happened to Lila. "This diner used to stand for something," Carl said, his voice resonating through the now silent room. Old Millie understood that. He knew it wasn't about how much money people had. It was about respect. One of the bikers stepped forward, a tall woman in her 50s, wearing a leather vest adorned with patches. "I'm Susan Martinez, president of the Iron Riders now," she announced. "We've been coming here for 40 years, every charity ride, every toy drive, every fundraiser. This was our home base until today." She turned to George. "We've already called your father. He's agreed to sell us the diner. The paperwork is being finalized as we speak." George's face went white. "You can't do that." "It's already done," Susan smiled. "And our first act as owners? We're making Lila the new manager." The story spread quickly on social media. Local news outlets picked it up, celebrating how the bikers had stood up against bullying. The Iron Riders' reputation for community service grew even stronger. Today, Millie's Diner still stands on that corner, now proudly owned by the Iron Riders Motorcycle Club. Lila manages it with the same love and care she once showed as a waitress. And every Tuesday, you'll find Carl at his usual booth, enjoying coffee and apple pie. The teenagers who had caused all the trouble? They returned a week later to apologize, not just to Carl, but to Lila as well. It turned out that witnessing 500 bikers stand up for what was right taught them more about respect than any lecture could. As for George, he tried to open an upscale restaurant across town, but it never reached the success that Millie's Diner had. People say he realized too late that true success isn't about fancy menus or exorbitant prices. It's about treating people with dignity and respect. The diner now proudly displays a new sign above its door. Everyone's welcome, as long as you bring respect. And beneath that sign, you'll always find a row of motorcycles parked outside, come rain or shine, serving as a reminder that sometimes the toughest-looking people have the kindest hearts. Lila's daughter, Mia, now a college graduate, often helps out at the diner on weekends. She shares with anyone who will listen how her mom taught her the most important lesson in life, that standing up for what's right might cost you something in the moment, but kindness and courage will always come back to you. The true measure of success isn't in how much money you make, but in how you treat others. Sometimes, standing up for what's right may seem costly at first, but kindness has a way of finding its way back to you when you least expect it. Just ask Lila. She'll gladly tell you, over a cup of coffee and a slice of apple pie, served with the same smile that has warmed hearts at Millie's Diner for over 20 years.